invite you to join me in word of prayer. O Lord, open thou our hearts to hear, through thy word to us draw near. Let us thy word, heir pure, retain. Let us thy children and heirs remain.
Amen. Unbelief
Stinks. Unbelief stinks. I mean, like a smell, a foul smell, something coming from somewhere that you don't know where it's coming from. You can't identify it. Unbelief stinks. About this time each year for the last 3 years or so, we've had a class in our Crossman Art Center called Paisenki eggs. It's an ancient Ukrainian form of art. It goes back centuries, where they take eggs and then decorate them with beeswax and dye. And so you take the beeswax and heat it up with a candle, and you place the egg in a light stain, and then when you take it out of that dye, you put the beeswax onto the egg, and it seals that color in, and then you take the egg and put it into a subsequent color of dye, a little bit darker, in order to dye that part of the egg, and then you put more beeswax on it, and intricately and successively you continue this process until the entire egg has been covered in beeswax, and only a little bit remains, which you finally put in that last bit of dye, the darkest dye that you want to use. And then taking it out, you do the last step. The egg is now completely covered in wax, and you place it near the candle, and you let it heat up the outer layer of wax, and then take a paper towel and then wipe off that wet wax, revealing the egg that's underneath. And once you get all the wax off, it looks something like this. Now I realize you can't see this very well, and that's okay, because I made this myself and it's very amateur looking. But I want you to imagine something intricate and beautiful in my hands. That's what Ukrainian Paisenki eggs are supposed to look like. And I mentioned that that was the last step, and it is the last step. Taking the wax off, it can't be the last step if you want it to be. You can take it home just like that, and the egg that's inside will eventually dry out through the porousness of the shell. It takes years, but a couple years down the road, the egg will become light and hollow as if you had blown out the insides. Now, I said that could be the last step. There's an optional last step you can do, and that is to blow out the inside of the egg. And I did that with this one. And to do that, you take a pin and you poke a hole at the top of the egg, and you turn over and you take a pin and you poke a hole in the bottom of the egg, and then you blow as hard as you can in one end, and all that innards, the yolk and the white, they just ooze out the bottom. But it's hard to do, and it takes a while, and it tends to give the artist a headache. And so I didn't do that with most of them that I made. I did that with this one, but with most of the other ones that we made in this Paisenki class over the years, I've just opted not to do that step and taken them home to let them dry out on their own. Now these are little oval works of art, and so they're to be displayed, and at our home we have a glass hutch. And inside that glass hutch we have some of our nicer dishes displayed. And so there is a depression glass dish inside there that we placed an arrangement of these Paisenki eggs that we've made over the years, and they were there displayed inside this hutch. And we've added to it over the years until this summer. This summer there was a foul smell coming from somewhere in our kitchen and dining room. And we were having a hard time identifying it. And so we tried to identify it and eradicate it in the normal fashion. And we first took out the garbage, assuming it's probably in there. And then when that didn't work, a few days later, we took out the garbage and then scrubbed the garbage can. And then a few days later, we tried cleaning the garbage disposal. Maybe it's coming from there. We even, after weeks went by, looked under the refrigerator and looked behind the refrigerator, seeing if we could find the source of where this foul smell was coming from. And then one day, I went into that hutch to get out one of the dishes. And the stench about knocked me over. The stench of a 2-year-old egg that had been drying very safely contained in its porous shell for nearly 2 years, that had somehow been punctured, and the smell started to ooze out of that egg and filled the entire hutch, and the hutch could not contain it. 2-year-old rotten eggs. I share that story because I want to give you just a sense of what I mean by when I say unbelief stinks. Unbelief stinks. Like a foul smell emanating from an egg that you don't know its source, but it's ruining the atmosphere. Unbelief stinks. Now, before you jump on that bandwagon with me, and start thinking to yourself, you know, he's right. Unbelief does stink. All those unbelievers who don't believe in Jesus, and all that unbelief that leads to their greedy corporate practices and their illicit nightlife, all the unbelief and the odorous unbelief of these religious radicals and their terrorism, all the putrid unbelief of those people who are trying to redefine modern morals. Oh, unbelief stinks. Before you get on that bandwagon, let me invite you to consider what kind of unbelief I'm going to be talking about today. It's in our gospel lesson, John chapter 11. It was read to you just a few minutes ago, but I'd like you to open up your service folder and take a look at it with me. It starts on page 5 of your service folder, but we're going to look first on page 6. So look at John chapter 11, start at verse 38. It's the first full paragraph on the page, second paragraph. John 11, verse 38. Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it, and Jesus said, "Take away the stone." And Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" And so they took away the stone. Unbelief stinks. This is not the unbelief of heathens who are out to eradicate Christianity. This is not the kind of unbelief. This is not the unbelief of atheists who are reorienting the ethical framework of our society. It's not that kind of unbelief. This is not the unbelief of the corporate swinger who's just looking to rise up the company ladder. This is not that kind of unbelief. This is the unbelief in verses 38 to 40 of the people of God. This is the unbelief of a disciple of Jesus. This is the unbelief of someone just like you and me. So when I say unbelief stinks, I mean unbelief stinks in your life and in mine. Like a rotten egg that's letting out its foul smell and you can't identify its source. Unbelief in our life ruins the atmosphere of joy and hopefulness. Unbelief stinks. Now, I've asserted that. I've illustrated it for you. You might even be able to smell it. But now we got to explain it. And so to do that, let's go back to the beginning of John chapter 11. Go back to the page 5 and go back to the start, and we'll find out what's going on here. Jesus is in Galilee, and he's with his disciples, and he receives word from another area of the country, from Judea, from a town called Bethany, where some of his close friends, Mary and Martha and Lazarus, live. And the word is that Lazarus is ill. Now this is the same Mary and Martha who hosted Jesus in their house that you remember from Luke chapter 10, when Martha is working in the kitchen and Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet to learn from him. John wants us to know in verse 2 that this is the same Mary who anointed Jesus with ointment and then wiped his feet with her hair. Now that's not going to happen until the next chapter, in chapter 12. But John wants us to know that ahead of time because he wants us to realize that these aren't just some fickle followers of Jesus. If there ever were devoted followers of Jesus, these folks are them. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And the feeling is mutual. So look at verse 5 there. It says that the Lord loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. The feeling is mutual. These are devoted and much loved followers of Jesus. And so the disciples, when they heard this news that Lazarus was ill, probably thought that Jesus was going to go right away. That he who healed sick people in every town and every village they went to would certainly go back to Bethany so that he could heal their dear loved one. But Jesus doesn't do it. And they assume that it's probably because the last time he was in that area of the country in Judea, the Jews tried to stone him. And so they were content not following him into that again. Except that 2 verses later, verse 7, Jesus said, 2 days later, Jesus said, let's go to Judea again. Now it takes some convincing between verses 7 and verse 16. But in there, Jesus does some talking to them, and eventually one of the disciples stirs the rest of the group and says, let us go with them so that we can die with them. That was Thomas who said that. Let's all go. We'll all die together. In a couple chapters in John's Gospel, John chapter 15, Jesus is going to say, greater love has no one than this, than someone lay down their life for their friend. This disciple, Thomas, and the rest of them who go with him, they love Jesus. So much so they're willing to lay down their lives. They believe in Jesus. And so they go from there down to Bethany. Verse 17, Jesus arrives in Bethany. And when he gets there, Martha comes out to see him. Mary stays in the house. Bethany is about 2 miles from Jerusalem, the place where they were trying to kill Jesus. But when they hear Jesus is on his way into town, Martha gets up and leaves the crowd of those who had gathered around to console her and Mary because of their brother. Martha leaves the crowd behind because she believes in Jesus. And she goes to Jesus. And when she sees him out there on the road, she says to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. It's a sign of belief. She believes that Jesus could have healed her brother Lazarus. But more so than that, go on to the next verse, which is verse 22. Not only does she believe he could have healed her brother Lazarus, she says, even now, I know that whatever you ask of the Lord, he will give you. She believes that Jesus can still heal Lazarus, even though he's dead. Martha believes. He's done it before. He did it for the widow's son in a village called Nain that we find out about in Luke chapter 7. He did it for the synagogue ruler, Jairus' daughter, that we find about in Mark chapter 5. Martha believes that he can do this. Martha believes he can raise the dead. And that leads Jesus to say some of the most profound words in all the Gospels in the face of death. Jesus said in verse 25 and 26, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even though he dies, yet shall he live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. But Jesus didn't leave it at that at the end of verse 26. How does he finish the verse? He looked at Martha and he said, do you believe this? Martha believed it. Martha believes in what Jesus has to say. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha said, I believe he'll rise again. And the resurrection on the last day. She remembers Jesus' teaching, and she's fully vested in it. She believes in what he said. Back in John chapter 5, Jesus talked about that last day. He said, whoever hears my words and believes him who sent me shall not come into judgment, for he has already passed from death into life. And don't marvel that I am saying this to you, because the hour is coming when all will hear the voice of the Son of God. And those who are in the tombs will come out. Those who have done good to rise to resurrection of everlasting life, and those who have done evil to resurrection of judgment. Martha believes this message of Jesus. She believes he's the resurrection of life. She believes that one day Jesus is coming back and she's going to be raised. She believes that all she needs to do is put faith in him, to believe in him, and she'll have already crossed from death into life. That she will not be raised to judgment, but will be raised to resurrected life in him. And she believes that's true for her brother Lazarus too, because he too heard Jesus' words and believed in God who sent Jesus. And so she believed that he was experiencing that eternal life. She had faith in Jesus. And Jesus said, do you believe this? And in verse 27, she replies and says, yes, Lord, I believe you are the Christ, the Son of God, who's coming into the world. Martha has faith. She believes. Now your text on page 6 jumps down to verse 38. There's some ellipses there. And so I got to fill you in on a little bit of the chapter that's not printed here for you. After this, Mary comes out to Jesus, and she talks to him as well. They have a similar conversation. And then Jesus is so moved by everybody who's grieving and mourning that out of empathy for everybody gathered, he tears up too and actually weeps with them. And then he leads them out to the tomb. That's verse 38. So we arrive at the tomb in verse 38. Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb, and it was a cave, and a stone lay against it. And Jesus said, take away the stone. And Martha, the sister of the dead man, said, Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead for 4 days. Unbelief stinks. Unbelief stinks. Martha's unbelief stinks. This is not the unbelief of the enemies of Christianity who want to eradicate the faith. This is not the unbelief of the enemies of Jesus who want to stone him and anyone associated with him. This is not the unbelief of people who just are ambivalent to spiritual things and things of faith. Now, that kind of unbelief stinks too, but that's not what I'm asking you to focus on in this text. I want you to see Martha's unbelief and how unbelief stinks, because unbelief prevents the people of God from seeing the glory of God revealed in their present circumstance. I'm going to say that again. Unbelief prevents the people of God from seeing the glory of God in their present circumstance. And that's just what Jesus says to Martha. So after she says, Lord, there'll be an odor. He's been in there 4 days. Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? See, I think this same episode is playing out in your life and mine, day after day. Because we're just like Martha. We're people who believe in Jesus. We believe he is the Christ, the Son of God who is coming into the world. We believe he is the resurrection of life. We believe that if we believe, simply believe his words, we'll have already crossed over from death into life, and we will not come into judgment. We believe he's coming back again one day, and there will be a resurrection of all flesh. But we believe we will be resurrected to life because we simply believe in him. We will not enter into that judgment. We believe in Jesus. And yet, even amidst that belief, there is this vestige of unbelief that still hangs on in there in our life. And that unbelief stinks. It's that unbelief that's hanging on for Martha here. She says, oh, don't open that tomb. Because the action of belief would have said, yes, Lord, open the tomb, raise him from the dead. But instead the action of unbelief says, oh, don't open it. There will be an odor there, Lord. And if she had acted on that unbelief and told everybody, no, don't open it, she would not have seen the glory of God in her present situation. Which Jesus said back in verse 4, that's why all this took place to begin with. Why was Lazarus sick? Why didn't Jesus go there right when he became sick? Why didn't Jesus heal his friend? Jesus said it was so the glory of God would be revealed. That's why Jesus allowed him to die. And Jesus wanted her to see it in her own circumstance. And so Jesus calls her again to faith. If Martha had acted in her unbelief, she would never have seen the glory of God in that situation. But Jesus called her again to faith. And he does that for you and me too. See, because each of us deal with that vestige of unbelief that's just hanging on there in our lives. And like a rotten egg that's letting out its smell and we can't identify the source, we don't know where it's coming from, it shows up. Shows up in our life when we've lost a job and the economy is not providing many opportunities, and so we start to get depressed and we get worried and we get anxious about it, so much so that we're not sleeping at night. Unbelief stinks. It shows up when there's been a falling out between a friend or a family member of ours, between us and them, and the pain of that situation and the words or actions that were shared back and forth have caused us to give up on ever having forgiveness for that person. Unbelief stinks. Unbelief stinks when we're giving our efforts and our energy for things that benefit us, but we have no interest in sacrificing that to invest our lives in the life of someone else. Unbelief stinks. And that unbelief is found even in the most devoted followers of Jesus. It's found in Mary's life. It's found in the life of Jesus' disciples. And it doesn't mean that we're not loved. They were very loved. It doesn't mean that we're not saved. We are saved, but it means we need help. We need help like the father of the epileptic son in Mark chapter 9, verse 24, who said, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. Not only does Martha exhibit this unbelief, but the disciples do as well. You know, those disciples like Thomas who says, let's go with him. Let's die with him if he's going to die. Let's go on to Jerusalem with him. Well, just what Thomas had said is just where the chapter ends up. So at the end of 11, where your text ends for today, the Jews are more insistent on killing Jesus at the end of this than they were at the beginning. Even though they know he truly did raise Lazarus from the dead, they want to kill Jesus and anyone else associated with this. We're going to find out in chapter 12, they want to kill Lazarus too. That unbelief really stinks. But what about the disciples? The disciples who went there to die with him. What happens to them when this all takes place, when Jesus is arrested? How many of them are there? But then how many of them follow to the first stages of his trial? 12 of them were there when he's arrested. Only 2 of them follow to the first stages of his trial. And Thomas is not one of them. And out of those 2 that do go and follow him to the first stages of his trial, one of them is asked on 3 separate occasions if he's a follower of Jesus, and he denied it all 3 times. And then even though 2 of them are there in the beginning of his trial, and one of them falls away, and one of them's still there, how many of them are there to take Jesus down off the cross after he dies? None of them. How many of them are there on Easter morning because they know that Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life? None of them. And where are they? John 20, verse 19 tells us where they are. They're huddled in a home with the doors locked for fear of the Jews. Seems they weren't really as ready to die for Jesus as they thought they were. Unbelief stinks. Even unbelief in the lives of the people of God. And Jesus says, if only you believe. Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? Do you want to see Jesus heal a relationship in your life? Then believe that he can and act on that faith. Do you want to see if God can care for you even in the most dire of circumstances? Then believe that he can and live in that faith. Do you want to see Jesus transform the lives of people around you? Then believe that he can and invest in them with that life of faith. Because Jesus is constantly calling us to a deeper level of belief in him. That's what he does to Martha in this text. If you believe, you will see the glory of God. He does it with Thomas too, later on after his resurrection. In John chapter 20, he says, look here at my hands, put your finger there where the nail marks were, put your hand here in my side. And then in John 20, 27, what does he say to Thomas? Thomas, stop unbelieving and believe. Yeah, we usually use the word doubting, stop doubting and believe, but it's actually not the word doubt, it's the word disbelieve. Stop disbelieving and believe. And whatever's going on in our lives today, I believe this is what Jesus is saying to us. This is what he's asking of us. Stop disbelieving and believe. Believe in him. When it came to the Paisenki eggs in our home that we had on display, I just needed to identify where the odor was coming from and which one it was coming from so I could remove it and then we could enjoy the rest of the eggs. And I just wonder today, is there something that stinks in your life today? Is there something that stinks? And have you been thinking it was the circumstances? Well, perhaps, and I'd like to suggest that perhaps what stinks is not the circumstances of your life, but it's the unbelief that creeps in on account of the circumstance. And Jesus can remove that odor from your life. He may not take the circumstances away right away. He may not change the circumstances at all, but he can sure make it smell a lot better. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 15 and 16, Paul said, we are the aroma of Christ among those who are being saved and among those who are perishing. To the one, we are the odor from death to death. To the other, we are the fragrance from life to life. The amazing thing about this is that when we believe in Jesus, not only does our life smell a whole lot better, but it spreads that fragrance of faith into the lives of other people around us as well. May you spread that fragrance of faith this week. In Jesus' name.
Amen.